Hi there, ho there, everyone. Hello. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to reading Machiavelli's Discourses. Today we're continuing our examination of Book 2. Today we're looking at Chapter 22. The chapter is over here, How False the Opinions of Men Often Are in Judging Great Things. So this is the question of the opinions of men, in other words, that they're false about judging great things. You can say, now let's go to this. How false the opinion of men often are has been seen and is seen by those who find themselves witnesses of their decisions, in which they are not decided by excellent men. If they are those decisions, which if they are not decided by excellent men, are often contrary to every truth. So in other words, they look at the way people make decisions. In other words, those who find themselves witnessed of their decisions, whatever decisions, by people. Usually, people. Okay, this is the idea. Most people don't understand what a person who does make a decision does. Only those who really most people who look at what you're doing and they will find themselves witnesses of their decisions. If they're not excellent men, they'll be contrary to what you decide. They're contrary to that truth, because excellent men in corrupt republics, especially in quiet times, are treated as enemies, either from envy or from other ambitious causes. One goes behind someone who either is judged to be good through a common deception, or is put forward by men who wish for favor rather than the good of the collectivity. In other words, you don't get the. And they treat. In other words, the really knowledgeable excellent men are kind of like harmed. They're treated as enemies, threats. They're good. They're my threat. They're my competition. They're either judged as enemies, or either from envy or from ambitious causes, right? And one goes behind someone who's either judged to be good through common perceptions, or put forward by men who wish their own favor, right, and the collective good. This deception is uncovered afterwards in adverse times, and by necessity, refuge is sought in those who were nearly forgotten in quiet times, as will be fully discoursed in this place. In other words, in Discourses 3:16, right? Discourses, book 3:16. Certain accidents arise about which men who had not had great experience of things are easily deceived. So in other words, accidents happen that men who have not experienced, they're easily deceived. Since the accidents that arise has in themselves such verisimilitude. Now, this is one of these words, like, what does that mean? It means appearance. In other words, the appearance of being real or true. In other words, they have so much the appearance of the truth rather than the reality of the truth, right? They're capable of making men believe whatever they are persuaded about such a thing. So in other words, that there's certain accidents that happen that if I don't have great experience about this, they're easily deceived, because these things, accidents will arise with things that look very much true, but really appear to look true, are capable of making men believe whatever they were persuaded of such a thing. These things have been said. Because of what the Nucimius, the praetor, persuaded the Latins of after they were defeated by the Romans. Livy 8:11, right? And because of what has believed by so many, a few years when Francis I, King of France, came to acquire Milan, which was defended by the Swiss, right? Again, in 1515. I say, therefore, that when Louis XII was dead and Francis of Angoulême had succeeded in the Kingdom of France, desired to restore to the kingdom the Duchy of Milan, seized a few years before by the Swiss, at the encouragement of Pope Julius II, again 1512, right? He decided to have aid. In Italy that would have made his enterprise easier, right? He sought to, besides the Venetians, with whom Louis had won over, right? So therefore, again, in 1513, right, he tried the Florentines and Pope Leo X, for it seemed to him that this enterprise would be easier when he should have won them over, since the troops of the King of Spain were in Lombardy and the other forces of the emperor were in Verona. Pope Leo did not cede to the king's wishes, but was persuaded by those who consulted him, according to what is said, to stay neutral, since they assured him that this policy consisted of certain victory. In other words, they don't risk anything. The two letters of 20 December 15 to Francesco Verdinelli and the Florentine ambassador of Rome, Machiavelli, the Pope allies himself with France. But in other words, the other one, no, you don't do that. Either policy. If they win, you benefit, and if they lose, you're not going to be seen part of the thing. And this is Machiavelli condemns this kind of behavior, right? For it did not suit the church to have powers in Italy, neither the king nor the Swiss. But since he wished to return it to its ancient freedom, it was necessary to free it from servitude of both the one and the other, right? The Swiss and the king. So because it was not possible to conquer the one and the other, either by themselves or together, one of them had to overcome the other, so the church with its friends might strike the one that had then would be left victor, right? This is the strategy that was going on. It was impossible to find a better opportunity than the present, since both the one and the others were in the field, and the Pope had his forces in order so that they could present themselves on the border of Lombardy, both near the one and the other armies, under color of wishing to guard his own affairs and stay there until they should come into battle. It was reasonable, since both the one and the other armies were virtuous, and that this would be bloody for all in both parties, and leave the victor in a weakened mode, so that it would be easy for the Pope to assault and break him, right? Thus he would be left with his glory as the lordship of Lombardy and the arbiter of all Italy. That would have been the logic. How false this opinion is seen from the result of this affair. For when the Swiss were overcome after a long fight, the Battle of Marengo, right? This is that battle we talked about earlier. The troops of the popes and of Spain did not presume to assault the victors, but prepared for flight. So the troops of the Pope they weren't to assault the victor, but prepared for flight. They were going to run away. Even that would not have helped them if it had not been for the humanity or the coldness of the king, who did not seek a second victory, but for whom it was enough to make accord with the church. In other words, the king didn't get he won one victory, so instead of getting a second, he made a deal with the church. So therefore, the words, it was a disaster. This idea that the Pope was going to achieve this. Oh, he'd be the Lord. No, he didn't do that. He didn't act. He didn't do that. In fact, the troops of the Pope in Spain did not presume to assault the victors, and that had not been for the humanity or the coldness of the king, who did not seek a second victory to attack them, right? But for whom it was enough to make a concord, right? This opinion has certain reasons. This opinion, this view, has certain reasons that at a distance appears true, but are altogether alien from the truth, right? For it rarely happens that the victor loses very many of his soldiers. For some of the victors die in the fight, but none in the flight. Some of the victors may die in the fight, but none in the flight. And in the order of combat, when men have turned face to face, few of them fall, especially because it most often lasts for a short time. And if, however, it lasts for very much time, and very many of the victors die, so great are the reputation that victory draws behind it, and the terrors that it carries with it, that it by far exceeds the harm that he had endured through the deaths of his soldiers. In other words, behind it, the terror that it carries, that oh my God, they spend that war and they finally defeat, and therefore it exceeds the harm. In other words, the benefit, the fear that, oh my God, they kicked those guys and they lasted a long time and they won. Oh my God, the fear from that exceeds the harm that has endured through the death of the soldiers, right? So that if one's army went to find him in the opinion that he would be weakened, it would find itself deceived, unless the armies were such that it could already combat him at any time, both before the victory and afterwards. Where they had to be in such a situation where they could have attacked him either before the victory or after. In this case, it could win or lose according to its fortune and virtue. But that which fought before and won would have the advantage rather than the other. In other words, I fought before the victory versus those who came afterwards would have the advantage. This was known with certainty from the experience of the Latins, from the fallacy that Numisius, the praetor, took up, and from the harm the peoples who believed him received from it. Right? They could. In other words, after the Romans had conquered the Latins, he carried out through all the country of Latinum that then was in that. In other words, after the Romans had conquered the Latins, he cried out that through all the countries of the Latinium, that then was the time to assault. That was then to assault the Romans, who were weakened by the fight they had just had with them. That the Romans were left a victory only in name, while they endured all the other harms as if they had been conquered, and that any little force that should assault them anew could finish them. Therefore, the people who believed him made a new army and were at once defeated and suffered the harm that those always will who suffer, who will suffer, who holds those opinions. In other words, this is again Livy 8:11. So, in other words, the guy said, "Oh yeah, oh my God, the Romans just conquered the Latins, and it was a big battle, and they're going to be weak. So let's attack them." And what happened was, well, it didn't work out. They were destroyed. And they will suffer always this belief. So you either have to attack them before the battle, because after the battle they have gotten more powerful. They've gotten that people look at, oh my God, they just defeated them out. Maybe we can't win them. Okay, in other words, if you weren't willing to fight them before, how are you going to fight them after and get support? That's the point. Now, okay, with that, we will stop here. We finish. If you have any comments or questions, please put them below, and I will see. When I see them, I'll respond to them when I see them. If like it, hit the like button because it helps. If you really liked it, share it on your social media. Share it to your friends. Share it far and wide. Another thing you can do is you can subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Subscribe. Encourage others to come check out the channel and subscribe. Okay, so but liking, commenting, liking, sharing, and subscribing, all of these help the algorithm up. And that way, what does that do? It means that people, when they search the Machiavelli Discourses, will come to discover these things. They'll come up, and more people will watch it and see it. Another thing is you want to you didn't like it, you have a problem, you can always say no, don't like it, but say why in the comments so people can benefit and understand why you didn't like it, and maybe correct me, maybe made an error or something. And this, again, I'm doing this for the sake of purposes of teaching, to going through this and benefit education. You want to follow me on social media, links are below. If you want to know more about me as an academic and check my scholarship out and things like that, and check my publication, academic work, you can check the academic social media links below, the social media links. And if you want to contribute the right do, you can do so through the links of Patreon and Subscribestar. Or you can, another way you can help is to directly buy one of my books. The current books, currently available books are listed below. You can order them, of course, at your local bookstore, but you can order them through Amazon, Barnes & online intermediaries, distributors like Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, Libris, Book Depository, etc., or through the publishers directly. And the ebooks are available. There's one dedicated ebook, but the ebooks are available through Amazon, Kindle, and other things, including some of the books that are published as book available as ebooks. So therefore, that's it. Take care, and we will look again next time we meet at chapter 23. Okay, therefore, take care. Bye-bye.